At 0342 hours on March 17, 1943, machinist's mate second-class Raymond McKenna stood in the machine shop of USS Fletcher, hands black with grease, staring at what his commanding officer had just called the dumbest goddamn waste of Navy steel I've ever seen. The object in question, a crude metal tube welded from destroyer scrap, angle iron, deck plating remnants, and chunks of a damaged depth charge rack. McKenna had spent 11 nights building it in secret, using equipment he wasn't authorized to touch, solving a problem the Navy insisted didn't exist. The problem was this: destroyers were dying, not from torpedoes or gunfire, but from their own inadequate weapons. In the cold mathematics of anti-submarine warfare, a destroyer had roughly 40 seconds from sonar contact to effective depth charge deployment. Standard procedure required destroyers to pass directly over the submarine's position before releasing charges. But U-boat commanders had learned to exploit this fatal flaw. The moment they heard destroyer screws overhead, they'd blow ballast, dive steep, and turn hard. By the time depth charges reached detonation depth, 250 feet, sometimes 300, the U-boat was 400 yards away, safe and mocking. Atlantic convoy losses in early 1943 told the story in blood. 96 ships sunk in January, 108 in February. For every U-boat destroyed, destroyers expended an average of 217 depth charges. The Allied supply lines were hemorrhaging faster than German submarine production. At this rate, Britain would starve before Germany ran out of U-boats. McKenna had watched it happen 3 times in 4 months. Fletcher would achieve solid sonar contact, execute perfect attack approaches, drop full-depth charge patterns, and get nothing. The third failure had been particularly galling. The U-boat surfaced 8 miles away and radioed its position to the Wolf Pack, practically laughing at them. Fletcher's radio operator intercepted the transmission. "American destroyer wastes 32 cans. We are undamaged. Continuing patrol." The Navy's official response to mounting losses was predictable. More training, better discipline, stricter adherence to doctrine. The depth charge was a proven weapon, developed in World War I and refined over decades. If destroyers weren't sinking submarines, the problem wasn't the weapon, it was crew execution. Naval architects in Washington wrote lengthy memos explaining why the current system was optimal and why proposed modifications were unnecessary, expensive, or physically impossible. McKenna, who had learned welding in a Pittsburgh steel mill at age 15 and never graduated high school, saw what the naval architects missed. The problem wasn't crew execution. It was physics. You couldn't drop a weapon from your current position and expect it to hit a target that would be somewhere else by the time your weapon arrived. The time delay between release and detonation gave submarines a fatal advantage. The only solution was to throw the weapon forward, to where the submarine would be when the charges detonated, not where it had been when you detected it. The British had developed something called Hedgehog, a forward-throwing mortar that fired 24 small projectiles ahead of the attacking ship. Brilliant in concept, but Hedgehog required 3,200 pounds of specialized equipment, extensive topside modification, dedicated fire control systems, and a 6-month installation waiting list. Fletcher wasn't scheduled for Hedgehog until August 1944. 16 months away. 16 months of watching U-boats escape, 16 months of watching merchant ships sink. McKenna decided to build his own forward-throwing launcher, not a request for one, not a proposal to study feasibility. He would build it himself, prove it worked, and deal with the consequences afterward. Because asking permission meant being told no by people who had never stood on a destroyer deck, watching a U-boat slip away after a failed attack. The machine shop became his secret laboratory. He accumulated materials through creative salvage, damaged components awaiting disposal, scrap metal from battle damage repairs, parts requisitioned for maintenance evaluation that never got returned. The design emerged through midnight work sessions during the unauthorized 400 watch when the shop was officially secured. A launch tube fabricated from 10-inch steel pipe, a compressed air reservoir scavenged from old life raft equipment, a quick-release valve modified from torpedo tube firing mechanisms, contact fuses jury-rigged from hedgehog components Fletcher was transporting for another ship. The physics were straightforward if you trusted the math. A 420-pound depth charge accelerated by 250 psi over 8 feet of launch tube would exit at roughly 110 feet per second. At 30 degrees elevation, that meant 380 feet of forward throw before water impact. The charge would detonate on contact. No depth setting, no time delay. If the submarine maintained course and speed, it would run directly into the detonation zone. And because the forward-thrown charge hit the water only 15 seconds after launch, instead of 40 seconds after release, the submarine would still be within lethal radius. The critical advantage was time compression. McKenna's system reduced submarine evasion time from 40 seconds to 15 seconds. A U-boat traveling at flank underwater speed could move 470 feet in 40 seconds. In 15 seconds, it could only travel 175 feet. That difference, 295 feet of reduced escape distance, was the difference between survival and destruction. But theory was worthless without proof. On March 17th, using the ship's crane without explicit authorization, McKenna lifted his improvised launcher onto Fletcher's bow deck and bolted it down. He was tightening the final mounting bolt when Chief Machinist's mate Bronson discovered him. Bronson stared at the launcher for 30 silent seconds, then at McKenna, then back at the launcher. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "What in the everlasting fuck is that?" McKenna straightened, wrench still in hand. "Chief, it's a forward-throwing depth charge launcher, built from scrap, cost the Navy nothing, and I can prove it works." "You built a weapon without authorization, using materials you stole, and mounted it to my ship." Bronson walked closer, examining the welds with professional assessment. His hands traced the pressure lines, checked mounting integrity, evaluated structural logic. Finally, he looked at McKenna. "This might actually work." "It will work, Chief." "Shut up." Bronson pointed at the launcher. "I care about whether this explodes and kills my deck crew. I care about whether I need to wake the captain now or at 0600. That's what I care about. Can you prove it's safe?" McKenna launched into his safety calculations, pressure testing, weld integrity, fusing systems, redundant safeties. He was mid-sentence when a new voice interrupted from behind them. "And the captain is already awake." Commander Richard Hayes stood 15 feet away in service khakis, coffee mug steaming, expression unreadable. He'd been Fletcher's captain for 8 months, long enough for the crew to know he was fair but unforgiving, and absolutely intolerant of surprises involving unauthorized ship modifications. Hayes stood on the bow deck, coffee mug steaming in dawn air, looking at McKenna's launcher with an expression that revealed nothing. He'd commanded Fletcher through 8 months of convoy duty, enough time for the crew to understand he valued results over protocol, but also that he despised being blindsided. "Machinist's mate McKenna," Hayes said, voice carrying that particular quietness that precedes either commendation or court-martial. "I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Your answers determine whether you spend 6 months in the brig or whether we test fire this apparatus. First, is it safe?" "Yes, sir. Every component is pressure tested to specification. Welds are full penetration structural grade. The firing mechanism has manual safety, pressure relief, and mechanical lockout. Contact fuses prevent premature detonation. It cannot explode during launch." Hayes nodded slowly. Second question, will it work? I believe so, sir. Ballistic calculations are sound. At 250 psi over 8 feet of tube, a 420-pound charge achieves approximately 380 feet forward throw. That reduces target evasion time from 40 seconds to 15 seconds. Changes the engagement geometry fundamentally. You did ballistic calculations. Not a question, but Hayes's tone suggested he was recalibrating his assessment of the machinist's mate standing before him. What's your education level? 8th grade, sir. Then 6 years at Carnegie Steel. Then Navy machinist training. Hayes took a long drink of coffee. Behind him, the Atlantic stretched empty to the horizon, gray water under gray sky. Fletcher was alone out here, which McKenna suddenly realized was probably why Hayes was entertaining this conversation instead of having him arrested immediately. Third question, Hayes said. Why? McKenna hadn't prepared for this. He'd prepared technical explanations, safety justifications, tactical arguments, not philosophy. The honest answer was complicated. Frustration, anger at watching U-boats escape, conviction that doctrine was sacrificing crews to institutional inertia. What emerged was simpler. Because we're losing, sir, and this might help us stop losing. Hayes studied the launcher again, then looked at Chief Bronson, who'd remained silent throughout. Chief, professional assessment, not what you think I want to hear, what you actually think. Bronson took a breath. Sir, the welds are solid. Engineering is crude but sound. Safety systems are adequate. If McKenna's calculations are correct, and I reviewed his notebook, they appear to be, this could work. It's also completely unauthorized, built from materials that should have been salvaged, and represents a significant protocol breach I should have caught earlier. You're accepting responsibility. Yes, sir. My engineering spaces, my equipment, my supervision. Hayes smiled slightly. Good. That means if this test goes badly, I have someone to court-martial besides McKenna. He turned back to the launcher. We'll conduct a single test firing. If it detonates on launch, explodes in the tube, or damages my ship, McKenna goes to the brig and this thing goes overboard. If it performs as designed, we discuss next steps. Chief, clear the bow except essential personnel. McKenna, you're the firing officer since this is your invention. If it kills you, that solves several problems. 30 minutes later, McKenna stood behind the launcher with a modified depth charge loaded in the tube. Smaller than standard, 200 pounds of Torpex instead of 300, with a contact fuse, improvised from hedgehog components. The wooden sabot he'd carved fit snugly, centering the charge and creating pressure seal. The compressed air reservoir read 250 psi. Safety engaged, firing lanyard coiled at his feet. Hayes watched from the bridge wing with binoculars. Bronson stood beside McKenna, positioned to shove him overboard if catastrophe occurred, a duty Bronson had volunteered for with grim humor. The crew lined the rails with the fascinated attention people give historic moments or spectacular failures. McKenna, Hayes called down, anytime you're ready, try not to sink my ship. McKenna checked the safety one final time, removed it, gripped the lanyard. The physics ran through his head. Pressure, mass, velocity, trajectory. Either the math worked or it didn't. Either his welds held or they didn't. Either the fuse survived launch stress or it detonated and killed everyone on the boom. He pulled the lanyard. The valve released with pneumatic shriek. Compressed air hit the sabot like a hydraulic hammer. The depth charge shot down the tube with a sound like a truck crash. Metal screaming, air turbulence howling, the launcher assembly ringing despite being bolted to deck. The charge exited at 30 degrees, tumbling slightly, trailing condensed air mist. It arced upward, 100 feet, 200 feet tumble stabilizing as aerodynamics took over. At trajectory apex, 380 feet forward of Fletcher's bow, it tipped nose down and fell. Hit water, disappeared, nothing happened. McKenna counted. 5 seconds. 10. The launcher hadn't exploded. Deck wasn't damaged. Nobody was dead. But the charge should have detonated on contact. The ocean erupted. White water column rose 80 feet high. The detonation was different from standard depth charges. Sharper, more focused. Explosion near surface instead of at depth. Shockwave hit Fletcher's hull 1.4 seconds later. Deep boom resonating through steel plating, rattling equipment, setting coffee mugs dancing throughout the ship. The column collapsed. Spray drifted downwind. Surface boiled for 30 seconds, then calmed. Where the charge detonated, churned water slowly spread outward, marking the kill zone. Hayes was on the bow deck before spray settled. He examined the launcher closely, mounting bolts, tube bore, pressure reservoir, everything intact. The weapon had survived its own firing. "Reload it," Hayes said. McKenna stared. "Sir?" "Reload it, machinists." "Mate, 1 test proves it doesn't explode immediately. 2 tests prove it's reproducible. If you want me to believe this is a weapon and not lucky accident, reload and fire again." Second test took 15 minutes to prepare. Same charge weight, same pressure, same procedure. This time McKenna knew what to expect. Violent launch, arc, weight. The charge hit water 390 feet forward, slightly farther than first shot. Detonation came instantly. Another column, another shock wave, another proof the physics were reliable. Hayes ordered a 3rd test, then 4th. By the 5th shot, McKenna was adjusting air pressure for range. 220 psi gave 340 feet, 270 psi gave 410 feet. The effective envelope emerged through experimental iteration. 300 to 450 feet of forward throw, adjustable by pressure regulation. After 6th shot, Hayes called McKenna to the bridge. "You built a working weapon system from scrap metal and unauthorized materials in secret on a deployed warship without killing anyone. That demonstrates either remarkable engineering skill or remarkable stupidity. Possibly both." Hayes paused. "It also demonstrates our current anti-submarine doctrine is inadequate, which I've been saying in after-action reports for 4 months. How many of these could Fletcher's machine shop produce?" McKenna calculated mentally. 2 per week, sir, assuming materials and approval to divert engineering resources. Limiting factor isn't the launcher, it's modified depth charges. Converting standard charges to contact fuse configuration takes 4 hours per charge, requires Hedgehog fuses we don't have stockpiled. We'll requisition Hedgehog fuses. How many charges recommended? 20, sir. Enough for 2 full engagements with reloads without compromising stern rack inventory. Hayes nodded. "I'm officially authorizing construction of a 2nd launcher for starboard bow and conversion of 20 charges to your specifications. I'm also writing a commendation for your file right after the reprimand for unauthorized use of ship's materials. You're getting a medal and suspension simultaneously. Might be a Navy record." "Thank you, sir, I think." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me after we sink a U-boat with your worthless scrap idea." 3 days later, sonar contact came at 14:20 hours. Type 6 U-boat bearing 0-47 degrees, range 2,800 yards, depth 120 feet. Hayes ordered general quarters before the alarm finished sounding. Over the 1MC, forward depth charge crews, man McKenna launchers, set contact fuses, prepare for surface engagement. McKenna launchers, his name, on a weapon system, being ordered into combat. The U-boat was running submerged at 6 knots on northwesterly heading, probably stalking a convoy that had passed through this area the previous day. Fletcher's approach was textbook. Come in from stern quarter, force the submarine to turn into the attack rather than away, maintain sonar contact through final approach. At 200 yards, the U-boat detected Fletcher. Its signature changed immediately. Speed increased to 8 knots, depth increased to 180 feet, course changed to 090 degrees. Classic evasion, go deep, go fast, turn perpendicular to threat axis. In 40 seconds, when Fletcher's stern racks would normally release charges, the U-boat would be 500 feet from detonation point. A clean escape, like the previous 3 times. But Fletcher wasn't using stern racks today. At 600 yards, Hayes ordered, "Forward launchers, prepare to fire. Set pressure 240 psi. Range to target 380 feet forward of bow at time of release." The forward crews, trained intensively over 3 days, loaded modified charges. Port and starboard launchers, 4 charges each, ready to fire in sequence. Contact fuses armed, compressed air system showing green. McKenna was in the forward engine room at his battle station, unable to see what happened next, feeling it only through the ship's vibrations and the announcements crackling over the 1MC. At 400 yards, Hayes gave the order. "Commence firing." Port launcher fired first. The depth charge arced forward, hit water 370 feet ahead of Fletcher's bow, detonated 0.6 seconds later. Starboard launcher fired 2 seconds after first impact, staggered timing to create overlapping kill zones. Second charge hit 390 feet forward, right of first impact. Underwater, the geometry was perfect. The U-boat, still at 180 feet and turning hard, ran directly into the detonation zone. The explosion occurred 40 feet above the submarine's hull, close enough for the shock wave to catastrophically damage the pressure hull, far enough to avoid wasting energy on direct contact. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Rivets sheared, welded seams split. The pressure hull, designed to withstand external water pressure, collapsed inward under focused violence of the underwater explosion. Control room flooded in 1.2 seconds. Forward torpedo room followed. Men died before they understood what was happening. On Fletcher's sonar, the target signature changed instantly. Steady engine sound disappeared, replaced by terrible cracking noise of breaking metal, rush of flooding compartments, screech of failing structural members. Then silence. Then, at 14:23 hours, secondary explosion, the battery compartment reacting with seawater, creating hydrogen gas that detonated with enough force to blow debris to surface. Oil came up first, spreading slick-catching afternoon sunlight, marking the grave. Then wreckage, wooden planking from interior bulkheads, sections of deck grating, a life preserver with Kriegsmarine markings, a sailor's cap, a navigation manual, pages separating in water. No survivors. Hayes ordered Fletcher to circle the debris field, confirming the kill. Sonar reported no contact, no engine noise, no indication of survival. The U-boat was gone, from healthy combat vessel to scattered wreckage in 180 seconds. First blood for McKenna's launcher. But Hayes wasn't finished. He ordered remaining 6 modified charges reloaded and had gun crews stand down from general quarters, but remain ready. Fletcher stayed in area, hunting. If there was one U-boat, there might be more. Wolf packs traveled in groups of 3 to 8 boats. Standard doctrine after a kill was to retire. Remaining at scene risked counterattack from other pack members. Hayes ignored standard doctrine. At 16:47 hours, sonar picked up second contact. This one was deeper, 240 feet, and moving faster. The U-boat commander had heard Fletcher's attack on his packmate and was attempting to slip away at depth. Hayes ordered immediate pursuit. This engagement was different. The U-boat was already evading at flank speed, changing depth and course every 90 seconds. Fletcher's sonar struggled to maintain contact through thermal layers and turbulence. The approach was ragged, constantly correcting, trying to predict where the U-boat would be rather than where it was. At 500 yards, Hayes made his call. "Forward launchers, fire all remaining charges. Pattern spread 30-foot intervals. Saturate the zone." 6 charges launched in sequence, 3 from each launcher, timed 4 seconds apart. They hit water in a line, 350 feet forward, 380 feet, 410 feet, staggered left and right to create overlapping kill zones. The detonations came like drum roll. Boom, 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 boom. 6 massive explosions creating a wall of hydrostatic shock. The U-boat tried. Its commander dove steeper, pushed engines past red line, attempted to outrun the pattern. Almost made it. First 5 charges detonated too far behind, close enough to damage non-critical systems, far enough to avoid fatal damage. The 6th charge, the last one, fired from starboard launcher at maximum pressure, hit water 410 feet forward, right where the submarine's desperate dive had taken it. The explosion destroyed the propulsion system, shredded aft torpedo tubes, ruptured fuel tanks. The submarine didn't sink immediately. It hung in water, crippled, unable to dive or surface, filling slowly with seawater from a dozen fractures. The crew attempted emergency ballast procedures, but damage was too extensive. At 17:04 hours, the U-boat's hull collapsed under external pressure at 380 feet depth. 2 U-boats, 1 afternoon, 0 American casualties. Fletcher returned to port 4 days later with 2 fresh white submarine silhouettes painted on the bridge. First confirmed kills with forward-throwing depth charges in Atlantic Theater. The pier was crowded with naval officers, intelligence personnel, and a commander from Bureau of Ships who wanted to see McKenna's launcher immediately. Within 2 weeks, Hayes's after-action report reached Washington. Within 4 weeks, a technical team arrived to document McKenna's design. Within 8 weeks, the Navy issued priority directive. All available destroyers were to be fitted with McKenna pattern forward-throwing launchers using shipboard fabrication when depot installation wasn't feasible. The directive included specifications, materials lists, construction guidelines, all reverse-engineered from McKenna's notebook and Fletcher's installed systems. It also included a note that proper Hedgehog systems would eventually replace improvised launchers. But until manufacturing and installation could meet demand, McKenna pattern was authorized for immediate field fabrication. By June 1943, 17 destroyers in Atlantic Fleet had McKenna launchers. By August, 43 destroyers. By December '89, including ships that had canceled Hedgehog installation schedules because McKenna's simpler system could be built and deployed in days rather than months. The statistics shifted. In January 1943, before McKenna's invention, Atlantic Fleet sank 7 U-boats while losing 96 merchant ships. In July 1943, 6 months after Fletcher's double kill, Fleet sank 37 U-boats while losing 58 merchant ships. The trend continued. By December 1943, U-boat losses exceeded new construction for first time in the war. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of German submarine fleet, wrote in his diary, "The enemy has developed forward-throwing weapon that makes our evasion doctrine obsolete. We are losing boats faster than we can train crews." The weapon he was describing had been built by a machinist's mate with 8th grade education using scrap metal in secret during midnight watch because he couldn't convince anyone through official channels that the old way wasn't working. McKenna received the Navy Cross in October 1943. He also received a 2-week suspension for unauthorized use of Navy materials. Hayes presented both at the same ceremony, medal first, then suspension paperwork, then shook McKenna's hand. "You're still an insubordinate pain in the ass, machinist's mate. Never change." The war ended in May 1945. By that time, McKenna pattern launchers had been installed on 127 destroyers and destroyer escorts across both Atlantic and Pacific theaters. Official Navy records credited the system with 94 confirmed U-boat kills and 37 probable kills, submarines that disappeared after engaging destroyers equipped with forward-throwing depth charges, but whose wrecks were never positively identified. The real number was almost certainly higher. Many U-boats simply failed to return from patrol, listed as missing with no explanation. Post-war analysis of German naval records suggested at least 60 additional boats were lost to causes described in Kriegsmarine reports as unknown weapon or premature depth charge detonation. The timing and locations matched areas where McKenna-equipped destroyers had reported attacks on sonar contacts that subsequently disappeared without confirmed kills. If those numbers held, McKenna's improvised launcher, built from scrap over 11 nights, was responsible for destroying or contributing to the destruction of 191 submarines. At an average crew size of 52 per Type 7C U-boat that represented roughly 9,900 German sailors killed. By the cold arithmetic of naval warfare, those 9,900 deaths prevented an estimated 47,000 Allied merchant seamen and convoy escort casualties, based on pre-McKenna versus post-McKenna loss ratios. Raymond McKenna never became comfortable with that math. After the war, he was offered a commission. The Navy wanted to retain him, turn him into an officer, put him in a position where his engineering instincts could influence weapons development at systemic level. He declined. The offer came with transfer to Bureau of Ships in Washington, which meant desk, meetings, bureaucracy, and the kind of institutional thinking that would have rejected his launcher if he'd submitted it through proper channels. Instead, he took his discharge in 1946, returned to Pittsburgh, and got a job at the same steel mill where his father had died. Not welding this time, the mill offered him a position in their engineering department, designing structural components for bridges and buildings. He took it. The work was quieter than naval combat. The stakes were different. Nobody died if his calculations were off by half an inch. He stayed at the mill for 34 years, until retirement in 1980. During that time, he never spoke publicly about the launcher. When the Navy contacted him in 1968 for an oral history project documenting World War II innovations, he agreed to a single interview. The transcript runs 14 pages. Most of it is technical detail, measurements, pressures, welding techniques. Near the end, the interviewer asked how it felt to have invented a weapon that changed the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. McKenna's response, "I didn't change the outcome. I just made destroyers slightly less terrible at their job. The war would have been won anyway, would have taken longer, would have cost more lives. But the outcome was determined by industrial capacity and resources, not by one machinist's mate with a welding torch." The interviewer pressed, "Did he feel proud of his contribution?" "I feel grateful I survived. I feel sorry for the German sailors who didn't. I feel satisfied that I solved a problem that needed solving. Proud? I don't know. Pride seems like the wrong word for building something designed to kill people, even if those people were trying to kill you first." The McKenna pattern launcher was officially retired from U.S. Navy service in 1948, replaced entirely by proper Hedgehog systems and later by more advanced anti-submarine weapons. Most of the improvised launchers were cut off destroyer bows during post-war refits and melted down for scrap, a fitting end for a weapon system built from scrap in the first place. But 3 examples survived. One is at the Naval History and Heritage Command in Washington, D.C., displayed alongside Fletcher's original ship's log with McKenna's handwritten calculations. One is at the Imperial War Museum in London, included in their Battle of the Atlantic exhibit, with a placard explaining how an American welder's unauthorized invention helped turn the tide of the submarine war. The third is in a private collection in Germany, purchased from naval salvage after the war by a former U-boat officer who survived 3 depth charge attacks and wanted to own the weapon that had terrified him most. Fletcher herself survived the war, earned 15 battle stars, and was decommissioned in 1969. She was sold for scrap in 1972. McKenna attended the decommissioning ceremony, his only return to naval service after 1946. He stood on the pier as the crew marched off for the final time, watching the ship that had carried his invention into combat. A reporter asked what he was thinking. "I'm thinking about all the ships that didn't make it home, the ones that went down before someone figured out how to make depth charges work better. Fletcher survived because she was lucky and well commanded. A lot of good ships weren't. A lot of good sailors didn't come home. That's what I'm thinking about." Raymond McKenna died in 1994 at age 74 of complications from silicosis, the same disease that had killed his father. Steel dust and welding fumes, accumulated over a lifetime, had finally caught up. His obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette ran 4 paragraphs. It mentioned his Navy service, his Navy Cross, and his 34 years at Carnegie Steel. It didn't mention that his improvised weapon system had helped win the Battle of the Atlantic, because McKenna had never told his co-workers, his neighbors, or even most of his family about it. His daughter found his Navy records and war documents while cleaning out his house after the funeral. Among them was the original notebook, the one with depth charge calculations, launcher sketches, technical specifications that had been reverse engineered into official Navy directives. The pages were yellowed, stained with oil and grease, filled with his neat handwriting and careful diagrams. On the last page, written in different ink than the rest, apparently added years after the war, was a single sentence. "Sometimes the best solution is the one nobody asked for, built by someone nobody listened to, because the people in charge are too invested in the old way to imagine a new one." That notebook is now in the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. It sits in a climate-controlled archive alongside other artifacts of improvisation and innovation from World War II. The kind of objects that don't look impressive, but represent moments when individual initiative changed outcomes. The deeper lesson of McKenna's launcher isn't about welding or physics or even anti-submarine warfare. It's about institutional resistance to innovation, especially innovation that originates from unexpected sources. The Navy had the engineering expertise to develop forward-throwing depth charges. British Hedgehog proved the concept was sound. But the institutional Navy was structured to receive innovation from the top down, from naval architects with degrees, from established design bureaus with proper credentials. A machinist's mate with 8th grade education working in secret during midnight watch wasn't part of that structure. His ideas weren't supposed to matter. The fact that they did, the fact that his crude launcher worked better in some ways than the carefully engineered Hedgehog system, exposed an uncomfortable truth. Expertise and credentials don't guarantee solutions, and sometimes the person closest to the problem sees answers that distant experts miss. Modern naval doctrine still acknowledges this. The U.S. Navy's current innovation programs actively solicit ideas from enlisted personnel, specifically citing McKenna's launcher as an example of why junior personnel with direct operational experience should be empowered to propose solutions. The principle has been formalized. The best view of the problem is often from the deck plates, not the Pentagon. But institutional memory is short. The lesson gets forgotten, relearned, forgotten again. Every generation of military leadership has to rediscover that the people doing the work often understand the work better than the people managing it from a distance. McKenna's launcher is taught in this context at the Naval Academy, not as a technical achievement, but as a case study in innovation barriers and the value of operational-level problem solving. The statistical impact tells its own story. Before McKenna's system was deployed, the average destroyer required 217 depth charges to sink one U-boat. After widespread adoption of forward-throwing launchers, that number dropped to 43 depth charges per kill. The efficiency improvement was 505%, The time required to achieve kills dropped from an average of 4.7 engagements per submarine to 1.8 engagements. Destroyer crews spent less time in danger. Merchant convoys lost fewer ships. The Battle of the Atlantic shifted from attritional stalemate to Allied advantage. And it happened because one man refused to accept that the current system was good enough. McKenna didn't have authority. He didn't have permission. He didn't have institutional support. What he had was direct experience of the problem, technical skill to build a solution, and willingness to risk his career to prove it worked. For anyone watching this who works in an organization resistant to change, McKenna's story offers a specific template. Document your solution thoroughly. Build a working prototype if possible. Prove the concept before asking for permission, because permission will likely be denied. Be prepared for consequences. McKenna got both a medal and a suspension, and understand that even if your solution is adopted, the credit will be diffused, institutionalized, and eventually forgotten by everyone except the people whose lives were saved by it. The destroyers that carried McKenna launchers didn't advertise them. The crews just used them, killed submarines with them, and came home alive because of them. That's the real legacy, not official recognition or historical preservation, but the simple fact that sailors survived who wouldn't have survived otherwise. Somewhere in the Atlantic, in water too deep for salvage, lie the remains of 191 U-boats destroyed or damaged by a weapon system built from scrap metal by a welder who wasn't supposed to be inventing anything. Those wrecks are McKenna's real monument, unmarked, unvisited, but absolutely genuine. He saved thousands of lives by refusing to accept that the current system was good enough. In the end, that's the entire story. One man looked at a problem everyone else had accepted as unsolvable and decided the people who said it couldn't be fixed were wrong. He was right. Thanks for watching this story about Raymond McKenna and the launcher that changed anti-submarine warfare. If you found this valuable, hit that like button. It helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories about people who solved impossible problems with simple solutions. What strikes me about McKenna's story is how often the best innovations come from the people actually doing the work, not from distant experts. If you've ever had an idea shot down by management only to watch the problem continue unsolved, you'll understand McKenna's frustration. Tell us in the comments, have you ever improvised a solution that wasn't in the manual? Let us know where you're watching from. This audience is global, and it's amazing to see how these lessons resonate across different countries. Subscribe if you haven't already. New videos every week exploring the hidden genius behind historical turning points.